Welcome back to the book club. Before I dive into the chapter reviews today, I wanted to throw in some opening thoughts about some things that I learned over the course of editing the last video. One of the main ones was that I've been saying the title of the series wrong. I've been saying Malazan Book of the Fallen, as in like there's a Book of the Fallen named Malazan. But now that I'm reading it and I actually like looked up online how people or how you're supposed to pronounce it, I realized that it's Malazan, as in like the people from Malaz. And Malazan Book of the Fallen is like the Malazan Book of the Fallen. The book is Malazan in origin. So I'm definitely going to screw that up many more times as I already have right now. But at least I know internally that it's supposed to be Malazan, so I'm going to try to say it properly. Also, while editing the last video, I looked up the maps of various locations of where things were happening so that I could sort of point them out as I was talking about them and use it as a background. And just looking up the maps alone and figuring out where the events took place really helped things click in my mind because I didn't really realize that like Genebakis is its own continent, and then like Ikto Khan and Unta are part of this other continent called Kwantali. Like Kwantali is mentioned a bunch of times, but I didn't actually know that it was a continent. I just thought it was like maybe another city or something. So once I had all those references and I could like figure out, okay, well, here's where Khan is, here's where Unta is, here's where Malaz City is, and like Hale is all the way on the other side of the world on like a different continent. Everything made a lot more sense. And also the beginning of chapter 3 makes that even more obvious because it starts with Baran sailing across the ocean. But either way, I think if you're getting a bit confused about where things are taking place, take a look at the overworld of the series' map, and you could sort of figure things out. The beginning of this book only has a map of Genebakis, which is probably where most of the things take place. But I had no idea where like chapter 1 and 2 were taking place, for example. And without further ado, let's get into chapter 3. All right, so chapter 3 takes place again in the year 1163. There's no time skips this time. And Paran is back, and this time he is now captain of a ship sailing east towards Pale, as I had mentioned before. He's now sailing across the ocean to the Genebakan continent. Also, Paran, we haven't seen him in 2 years, so now he is a captain, so he's sort of moved up in the ranks a little bit since we last saw him. He is tasked with now leading the bridge burners, within which the girl is a recruit and is responsible for corrupting them, according to Topper at least, and his sources. So they sort of believe that this girl is the one that's causing the bridge burners to like turn on the Empire or something. This girl, of course, is Sari, so the figures controlling and manipulating her apparently have not been subtle enough, and they sort of know that she's being a nuisance in some way. It was also mentioned through Paran's thoughts that Whiskey Jack, who is the sergeant of the bridge burners, is also the one who is talking with him along the battlements in the prologue, like 7 or 9 years ago at this point. So they actually have met before. Topper instructs Paran to command the squad and stay close to the recruit but not make her suspicious. They are next headed to Darujistan, and the Empress doesn't want this recruit messing things up. After landing in a port city, Paran is led to a quarrel, which is some sort of 4-winged flying bug thing, which will take him to Cloud Forest with a green Maranth, and then a black Maranth will lead him to Pale. The Maranths are apparently split up into clans with different colors, and they speak a strange language, and they wear chitinous armor, and it seems like people aren't really sure if they're humans or they're some other race. We then move back to Pale, where Tattersail talks with a grieving Bellerden, who is one of the high mages who participated in the siege. He's a Thelomin, which is described as some sort of giant race, and he's grieving his dead lover Nightchill, another high mage who was part of the siege. Bellerlin does not at all believe Teicheren was at fault for his lover's death and the disaster of the siege, and this was all just a strange misfortune. The bridge burners are then lamenting about how 1,300 were killed when the tunnels collapsed before the siege of Pale. Teicheren told them to give up searching for their dead, and they are pretty pissed about that. They also theorize about the girl Sari, who is acting strangely. They think she may be a member of the Claw, and perhaps some magery that Teicheren's involved in. So interestingly, Sari is thought to be working with the Empress by the bridge burners, but then the Empress's team thinks that they're working with the bridge burners. So like everybody's pointing fingers at Sari and thinks that she's working for the other side, and is just like this chaotic in between, I guess. Next, Tattersail is called to Teicheren, who requires a reading of the deck of dragons. He immediately says, "Tell me of the spinning coin," and somehow knows about Opan and what she last did with the cards. She begins flipping cards and reads first the Orb, which means judgment and true sight, and then the Virgin High House of Death, scarred and blindfolded with blood on her hands. Tattersail immediately associates this with the recruit Sari, but she tries to keep this a secret because it's clear that Taishren doesn't have the same association. Next comes the Assassin High House Shadow, also known as the Rope. Count of Knots Unending, the patron of assassins, is in this game. She hears the howling of hounds, and this is very clearly pointing to the two gentlemen that Sari is associated with, Cotillion/Amanus. Then the fourth card was Opon yet again. The last card is the Crown, Wisdom and Justice. She interprets this to mean Darujistan, the last free city that they plan on capturing next. Tattersail offers some vague interpretation of these cards to Taishren so that he doesn't suspect the association with Sari that she felt. It's also revealed in the scene that the deck of dragons is not just like pseudoscience tarot readings in this world, but there's actually some sort of magic or influence that Tattersail feels when reading the deck. And it seems like whatever the deck is showing is actually things that are happening. It's not just like random events. It's like actually some sort of magical prophecy that like hints at what these like gods or ascendants are doing. Finally, Paran has arrived near Pale, and he laments about how it's been 2 years since he's had any friends, so he's been kind of a loser for the last 2 years. He mentions that natives from the 7 cities have a predisposition for making trouble, and that the 2nd, 5th, and 6th armies are mostly from that region. The 2nd was mostly wiped out in the Siege of Pale, so this potentially alludes to a purposeful sacrifice of people that were conquered by the Malazan Empire previously and may not be happy with the Empress. Paran is chatting with a member of the Claw who knows a lot about the history of Whiskey Jack and the Bridge Burners, some of which had been stripped from the annals. Whiskey Jack used to command the company, despite now only being a sergeant, so he's been demoted over the last 9 years since the Empress took over. Apparently, this Claw member is the last Claw of the 2nd. Kaladin Brood's Teist Andy are able to pick out a claw from 1,000 paces, and so the 5th and 6th have also lost their claw members when fighting Kaladin earlier. The unnamed claw member points out the tension between Taishren, who is at the Empress's heel, and Dujek One Arm, whom the remaining army will undoubtedly follow. He says, "What's been gathered here is a storm waiting to break." Before parting, the claw gives his name to Paran, Tok the Younger. Paran heads to some barracks to ask for Whiskey Jack. He talks to somebody named Picker, who pretty openly disdains him and tells him to go back to Quan Tali and that he won't last long here. Paran heads to where some bridge burners are playing cards and is surprised and frightened at how insignificant he feels and how likely it is that he's going to be stabbed in the back. He notes that nobody here cares that he's a noble or working with the adjunct, and they just see him as a leader who has never been in battle before. He is then, as soon as he leaves the bar, attacked while heading to the barracks by none other than Amanus and Cotillion. Amanus says that something has entered their warren and is hounds hunt. Cotillion, inhabiting the girl Sari, says that this is the man sent by Lorne to find him. By stabbing Paran, they should draw Lorne into the fray. They walk away and Paran is left, maybe dead, and hears a coin endlessly spinning. So he did pretty quickly get stabbed in the back, as he thought he would. So some of my general thoughts on this chapter: we now see some converging arcs. Paran headed across the sea and is now meeting up with Whiskey Jack's group, and he's going to be the commander of them. Sari is, of course, a member of Whiskey Jack's group, and Tattersail is now tightly bound with Whiskey Jack's group because Quick Ben did the whole soul transfer thing with Hairlock, and Tattersail is taking care of Hairlock. There are still 3 factions at play, though, from what I can tell at least. There's Paran and the Will of the Empress, as well as Lorne, the adjunct. There's then Whiskey Jack, the Bridge Burners, and Tattersail, who seem to be like pro Malazan Empire, but they don't like the Empress. They like the old Empire, the old Emperor. And then there's Sari, who everybody thinks is a weirdo and nobody really knows what she's up to, but they all think that she's up to something that is against them. We also learn a little more about maybe why Taishren did what he did during the siege and sort of attacked his own team. When Tok the Younger was talking with Paran, there's mention of the 2nd, 5th, and 6th armies mostly being from the 7 cities, which was a previous conquest of the Malazan Empire, and they were wiped out pretty thoroughly in this campaign for Pale. The other 3 high mages that Taishren used in the siege were all either from the 7 cities or fought in that campaign. They were all pretty old. So at this moment, at least, my thought is that the reason behind this friendly fire may have to do with trying to get rid of some 7 cities sympathizers or people who were like maybe still harboring some feelings for the old emperor who didn't really like the way that the new empress was running things, who were part of these older campaigns. The Bridge Burners were also the Emperor's elite group, so getting rid of them would also get rid of sympathizers of the old regime. And finally, we see that Sari seems to actually be inhabited by Cotillion in this scene where she stabs Piran. So it's not really clear if she's like always being inhabited by him or if she's only sometimes being inhabited by him. I'm not really sure if she has any free will of her own or if she's just like, he's using her body to do whatever he wants to do. All right, now in chapter 4, this takes place again right after the events of chapter 3, no more time skips for now. And we begin with Tattersail talking with the bridge burners about how Hairlock is going insane and he's using the power of chaos to try to figure out who in the Empire wants them dead. There are apparently paths that lie between warrens, which Hairlock is using to infiltrate and sneakily get information. This apparently weakens the warrens and it allows Hairlock to break into them. Tattersail and the bridge burners discuss that they're going to try to figure out who Taishran is working with and how they can arrange his fall from grace and root out whoever's opposing them within the Empire. They aren't convinced that the Empress is to blame, and they potentially think that it's somebody else in her service. Tattersail also suspects that Kalam, one of the bridge burners along with Whiskey Jack, was once one of the Claw, which she says that one cannot leave alive. He mysteriously gives a non-answer when questioned about it, so I think this hints that he probably was a part of the Claw in the past. The conversation then switches to Sari, and Kalam and Quick Ben have pieced together the events from 2 years prior. The 7 Hounds of Shadow were responsible for the event on the coast of Ikto Khan, and Lauren, the mage killer of the Empress, was sent to investigate. This is related to some of the readings Tattersail had from her deck of dragons, and the bridge burners suspect Sari is involved with House Shadow. Kalam mentions the Shadow Warren only appeared after the Emperor's assassination by Lysine. Shadow Throne, which I think is another name for Amanus, and the patron of assassins Cotillion were unheard of before the Emperor Callan said and Dancer's deaths. The beef between House Shadow and Lysine is personal in nature. House Shadow was apparently closed until 1154, and it had been a millennia since it was ruled by a Teist Eater, some other unknown race that are potentially cousins of the Teist Andi, who now exist. We also learn more about the Emperor's first sword, Dasim Ultor. It is said that he accepted a god's offer, and Hood, the god of death, made him his Knight of Death. And then something happened that caused Dasim to renounce the title, and thus he betrayed a god and he got killed. Tattersail somewhat begrudgingly agrees that she's going to stick with the bridge burners and Hairlock and try to figure these mysteries out. Suddenly, the sapper Fiddler gets a bad feeling and senses a knife in the night. The bridge burners head out and go find Sari. Piran wakes up in a warren, not dead, as his passing through Hood's Gate was actually interrupted by Opan, the twins of Chance, and one of the twins tells Piran that they are meddling. They hear a howling in the distance, and Opan must be meddling in Amanus' warren, as previously mentioned. His hounds were already set into action. The twins ask for Hood at the gate, but he's apparently busy, and another thing comes out of the gate, who reports to Hood. The twin sister says that Piran was murdered at the hand of a god, and that makes him fair game for interrupting his soul's natural passage. I think that this implies that either Cotillion or Amanus are a god. I think that they both actually ended up stabbing her, so I'm not exactly sure which one is implied as being a god, but it is one of them. The twins ask for Hood to make them uncertain, them being Cotillion and Amanus, and offers to send someone close to Piran to death in his place. The Hounds and Amanus, king of High House Shadow, arrives and demands to know who opposes him. Piran then fades to black, and he feels the events of his life being reordered and changed. He is then surrounded by Picker, who had warned him about being stabbed like an hour ago, and she's surprised to find him still alive. We swap back to Tattersail, who's back at her deck of dragons again, and this time feels like the game is completely shifted. She sees a conflict between High House Dark's Knight and High House Shadow. During a conversation between the sapper, Fiddler, and Whiskey Jack, we learn that Tattersail has a troubled past. She also turned down being a High Mage multiple times, and therefore is powerful enough to go against Taishran. The High Fist Dujek One Arm enters, and he mentions that he's been under pressure to disband the Bridge Burners. He tells them that if they survive Darujistan, they have permission to just disappear. Whiskey Jack says that he will stand and fight with the High Fist. We move back to Tattersail, where her, Quick Ben, and Kalam are monitoring the infiltration by Hairlock. It said that he went into the Warren of Shadow and beyond the very gates of the Shadow Realm. He was shifting warrens on his way out and was being chased by hounds. Captain Piran's assassination attempt is then discussed, and based on his wounds, it's immediately obvious that he lived only because of intervention, but he has deep trauma to his body and mind. Quick Ben knows this attempt came from Shadow, and all knew with certainty that Sari belongs to Shadow too. Whoever interceded is in opposition to the realm of Shadow. The next morning, we learn a bit more about the Moran. The alliance between them and the Empires changed the face of war, as they have quarrels to transport soldiers and supplies by air. Scholars think they're humans, but they drag their dead off before anyone can tell after battles. They also live in cities in the forests that nobody has seen. In the final scene of the chapter, we see a hound named Gear crawling through Pale hunting for Hairlock. Gear finds the building he's in, while Hairlock, as cocky as ever, talks about how easy it was to dodge the hounds. The hound then attacks, tearing through Tattersail's defenses. Hairlock joins the fight and uses chaotic magic, trying to reach for the hound's soul. Paran steps out, now apparently awake, and he stabs the hound, causing it to retreat. When asked how he penetrated the hound's magic, he says, "Just lucky, I suppose." A clear reference to Opan's interference earlier. The chapter ends yet again with Tattersail hearing a spinning coin. So my general thoughts about this chapter, there's a lot of lore that gets explained even more deeply, which helps contextualize some of the things that have been happening throughout the book so far. For example, High House Shadow gets mentioned many times, and Amanus gets an additional honorific. He's the king of High House Shadow. And there's a reason still unknown to us that Amanus and Cotillion appeared only somewhat recently, in 1154, and the Shadow Warren was closed for millennia prior. So they have some personal beef with Lysine, and they are back to resolve that. We also see that the cards from the deck of dragons aren't actually just cards, but they represent beings in this world. For example, Opan the Twin Jesters are actually real, and they do exist, and so like the card represents a real thing and not just like a vague idea like a tarot card. There's also mention of ascendants in this chapter, but it's still not exactly clear what that is. They're talked about as beings with immense power, so I'm not sure if it's the same thing as a god, but they also mention gods and ascendants separately, so I think that there is some distinction. With Paran's assassination and subsequent intervention, there's opposition between someone and the realm of Shadow. Based on the Deck of Dragons scene, Tattersail sees that there is some conflict between High House Dark's Knight and the House of Shadow, and my guess at least is that High House Dark's Knight is Animander Rake, because it's mentioned that he's related to the House Dark, or he's like the Lord of Dark or something along those lines. So I don't know if he is the High House Dark's Knight or if he's just related to the House Dark, but my assumption is that there is some conflict between whatever Animander Rake wants to do and whatever these House of Shadow folk are doing. Also, one additional note, I did finally look through the glossary that's in the back of the book and picked up a few phrases that have been repeated a few times and I didn't really know what they meant. And one of them is that the Warrens of Chaos are miasmic paths between the Warrens. So I was confused earlier about like if the Warren of Chaos was its own thing, but apparently whatever Hairlock was doing with the Warren of Chaos was manipulating the paths between the Warrens. The next section I'll cover will be the entirety of Book 2, Darujistan, which is chapters 5, 6, and 7. I've already read a little bit into chapter 5, and it seems like we have a whole new host of characters here. I'm not sure if chapter 6 and 7 will be similar, but it might be a little while until we get back to Whiskey Jack and Tattersail and all of them. I'm definitely looking forward to figuring out more about what's going on between the Bridge Burners, the Empress Lysine, and also Sari, and if there's going to be some conflict between Animander Rake and Cotillion / Amanus, or if that's just like a false assumption that I'm making. But either way, there's like a bunch of webs of conflict going on and everybody's sort of blaming each other. So I'm very curious how this is going to get resolved. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Fantasy Book Club. I'll see you next time.